I'd like to welcome my dear friend, Kathy Solberg. Kathy had last year had been taking a writing class that I was doing. I actually taught the writing class because of Kathy. Kathy was like the impetus behind it. Sometimes somebody gets to be the wind beneath your wings.
Mhm.
And she started writing about this concept. She's working on a book, and the concept was so interesting. I think it applies to all of us. And it applies to this particular point in time, many of the challenges that we're facing. So I think you're bringing something really interesting forward, Kathy. And the word that I heard you use for it was unweaving. So, can you tell us where that word comes from for you? Just
I
start
can.
with that one piece.
I can. Thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I am the unweaving piece came to me as I am a community weaver and I am a physical weaver. And a lot of my work tends to be about systems. So I'm going to put that aside and talk about a mistake that I made in my weaving on my loom that I had to take out. And as I am writing the book that I have been working on, my book was about reweaving. And then as I wove along on my physical work, I noticed that I made a mistake. I had about 6 inches to go back to fix the mistake. And it's a very methodical practice to learn how to unweave what doesn't belong. And when I had that moment of unweaving my scarf that I was working on, I came to realize that in my book, before we could reweave anything as far as personal or system narratives go, we had to start with the unweaving. So we didn't build on top of anything that didn't have a strong foundation. Like with a house, you would
Mm,
never build on top of something that was broken. So the
and
unweaving,
something that no longer fits for us. Yeah. So, if we're looking at our lives, Kathy,
yeah,
and where we are now, in our lives, the challenges that we're facing in the United States and in our communities and outside of the United States. And we think of things like climate change and politics and ec- economics and just all kinds of things. If we were to face these things with this concept that you're writing about in your book, which is unweaving, what does, before reweaving, what does that call us to do? What does that call us to pay attention to if
it
we're
calls,
unweaving?
it calls us to pay attention to ourselves. Because when we look at the world and the systems that are big and broken, and when we try to think about what can I control and where do I start? Systems change on any level, whether it's climate or healthcare or education, is incremental. And in order to look at how we can have an impact, I find the world to be really overwhelming. Yet I have a sense of responsibility to decide where I can show up with what I can do. But before I can know what that is, I need to do the unweaving to know what are my threads. If we all have personal tapestries, it's important for us to know how we're going to show up within that workplace, that advocacy session, or anything that we care about to know how we can bring our best selves to make a difference.
So in this analogy, our threads would be our values, our things that matter to us, things that we believe. Now, when you say this, I'm struck, and this is just us having our conversation. I'm struck by how quickly things are unraveling around us. It's no longer unraveling slowly, it's unraveling rapidly. More rapid than human beings can really manage, which
True.
is the overwhelming piece. So, how does the process of reweaving and unweaving, how do you think that can support us even when the speed of light is moving so fast around us that it's beyond human pace?
Someone had suggested to me that a fabric of our country as we currently know it was being unwoven. And I said, no, no, no. I believe that someone has thrown acid on the fabric and destroyed the fabric. And so with that analogy, it's not an unweaving that's necessary. It is how do we take that disruption in a way where we personally, to get back to looking at our own tapestries, what we care about, our communities. Can I share a little story?
Yeah, and I think for our listeners, what you're saying is and how I frame that is how we're now holding our threads together. And with whom? Like, who
Who
is really important? So if acid has hit the fabric and left this huge burn mark, basically, and
Yeah.
that is what's happening, really important to connect our threads as well as we can to each other. Yeah, so what's the story you want to share?
It's I was doing this work around unweaving and defining community weaving with a man that happens to live in Nigeria. And when we were talking to one another, he ended up sharing, I'm very sorry about your elections. And he lived in a place where he has felt oppression within his country and government. And at the very end, it was the end of a beautiful conversation and co-writing experience we had. But at the end, he shared, Kathy, what matters when our government is in that place is my family, my friends, my community, and my work. And sometimes for us to start to figure out, for me to start to figure out where do I make a difference? Because I cannot fix the big system, but I can do small work to make sure that my community, my neighborhood, my where I am is creating safer places to be and insulation in a way by protecting and
Mhm.
knowing my own fabric.
Yes, and that buffering
Yeah.
is so important. And how we show up now in these times with each other and for each other is it's always there's so many opportunities for that. I mean, it is almost unbelievable how many opportunities there are to be consistent, connected to each other in our communities, but in our families, in our friendships, in our work, really checking ourselves and just looking at how connected can I show up? And how do I keep these essential threads supported, buffered? What was that word you just used? Safe. Keeping them safe, right? Making these safe spaces. because we're not able to necessarily hold up the sky right now.
Yet we can hold up one another.
Yes. So, as you are writing this book and you have worksheets to go with it, what are some practices or suggestions you have for our listeners who may want to try to apply some of the thoughts that you have, the lessons you've taken from weaving into life that you want to share?
Hmm. I'll give a brief three words you need to know about weaving are the threads. And so the threads are all the pieces that are your life stories, your experiences, what's been passed down. And then in weaving, you have the warp, which is the vertical threads that are up and down. Those don't move. So you need to know your what's been given to you, your core relationships in your life, the immovable threads, and then what goes in between those threads as we're weaving is called the weft. Those are our daily experiences, what we believe, how things have shaped us. And what I suggest that just with those, knowing your own threads, it takes a while maybe to remember the three weaving terms because it's a language that's hard to understand. But when you look at the threads that make your own life, all of the threads don't need to be changed, but some of them, what serves you, what no longer serves you, what thread isn't making your fabric as beautiful and useful anymore that you need to get rid of, or just maybe redo. But some threads were given to you and they are not who maybe you are today. So I encourage, looking at my practice has to do with notice, clarify, and act. And really, there's a lot of space for just the notice part. Notice what makes you who you are and your values and beliefs and your stories, and be willing to let go of the threads that don't work for you anymore.
You know, as you say this, I'm thinking about people that have shared stories with me about changing their political views. That, they thought in their families, we always voted this certain way and we always, right, believed in this certain philosophy. And over time, they have found themselves unable to vote for a particular political party and part of that is that process of what you're describing of asking yourself what really fits, what no longer is true for me. I I remember hearing somebody talk about they live a couple states away from me, and they were sharing how, you know, a low-income housing unit was being built in their neighborhood, and their neighborhood was higher income residences. And at first they were on the side of like, we're against this project and, rallying at their city hall. And then they said, and the next thing I knew, I was standing there defending and protecting this project and asking to get more money for them and helping to donate on my own. And what had happened was this process that you talked about, where we thoughtfully, I think you're saying to people that this is a very thoughtful process where you really take an inventory, and as things are happening around you, you're really asking yourself deeper questions about what is true for you and what is maybe no longer true or no longer fits for you given what's happening. I mean, certainly there's many world events you can choose from to say, or maybe some old beliefs no longer apply. Um, so,
And do those threads that you once held now create limitation or suffering?
so tell me why you feel that this is essential and important work for people.
I believe most of us don't know what to do. And in a world that tended to vote for disruption, how can we show up in a grounded way to have an impact and know
Hmm.
what disruption looks like, that is within our purvey around what we can care about? I left a high level job to do systems work because after the pandemic, everybody wanted to go back to normal. And I was like, no, no, it wasn't normal. And I was alarmed at how people wanted to return instead of to look at everything that had been learned through such a collective trauma as was the pandemic, that the learning should promote such opportunities for growth and change. What I found as I went out into the world is nobody had the capacity to look at what was needed to implement that change. It's all people could do to put one foot in front of the other. So
Mhm.
at one point, my book included systems. I no longer, I can't fix systems. I can work, I can start with myself, and I can look at systems that I'm a part of in my community, in the places I connect with others, in my workplace. And I have the capacity through this process of unweaving to be able to have an impact there. And
I hear you saying, and I'm feeling in our conversation, how grounding this work is.
yes,
You know, how it isn't about out there as much as it is about in here and about getting grounded and maybe regrounding over and over again, that we have to keep asking ourselves questions about what is true for us now, given all the changing circumstances. And what you're saying is, like in the pandemic example, is that, you know, when we're faced with very overwhelming circumstances, we just want things to feel stable. We want them to feel quote unquote familiar. We want them to be predictable. We want them to be normal. And what you're saying is, but when the winds of change are all around us all the time, we also need to be sort of planning and understanding and evaluating who we are, who we choose to be in the face of this. That's what I hear you saying. And that it's a grounding process in the change around us to keep regrounding ourselves with, well, what is true now, given all this information that has been upended at us? I mean, part of the overwhelm that people are really experiencing is that the speed and intensity of new information coming at all of us is, you know, more in a day than generations ago people got in a lifetime. So, you know, I think what you're saying is this is about how we keep rebalancing ourselves with changing information.
yes. And if you learn to do that with yourself, with questions and noticing and observations, then you can take it into your workplace, you can take it into your community, and take those same observation noticing skills to look at your workplace in the same way you examined yourself. You can look at your community and what has been passed down, what belongs, what doesn't belong, what's working, what isn't working, in a way that can foster incremental change. But if you don't know how to do it with yourself and start with you, then the work feels foreign and overwhelming instead of realizing that there's a saying that I think I said it. There's a saying that I said that is if systems change was easy, somebody would have done it by now. And no one has. And we live in a world where we want it now. And and it's not gonna come now. And this is how we can start to make our world more manageable, grounded, and not feel as if I don't feel as out of control as I have with everything coming at me. I feel a responsibility to be aware and but not to fix it. And this
And
is
also to really care for oneself as just a human being
yeah.
in these times, that the calling for that is even higher, not to try to deal with the 1 million things coming at you, but to pick and choose what matters, to know when you need to rest from it all, to
Mhm.
know how much what your capacity is for attending to all of this and some of this or whatever part of this you want to. But I also really love about your work that you're using the word weaving in it, because I think in these times people are feeling like there's so much being torn apart. And there's so many cutoffs happening for people where they're just feeling cut off. And sometimes it's happening in their families where people are making breaks and like, I'm no longer talking to this person. And sometimes it's happening in their communities where people are getting judged or being ghosted or being canceled or being, right? There's
Wow.
so much of this cancel culture that's everywhere, and it's such a threat to relationship and to connection, and that we're all here in this. And I think the weaving part of your work is also calling us to how do we continue to connect.
And it's so fundamental. If you look at fiber, it's everything we are and we wear. It's ancient, and I found a lot of solace going back in the tale of Greek mythology of Penelope and Odysseus. Penelope was the first instance of deliberate unweaving when Odysseus went off and Odysseus's father wanted to they wanted to marry her off, and her son wasn't old enough to be king. She said she was making a or the she was making a burial shroud for her father. And so every day she would weave, 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 weave. And then at night she would unweave, unweave, unweave. And she kept it going for 7 years until they figured out that she was unweaving at night and weaving in the day. But her intention with that was to give herself time for her son to become old enough to be the king and for her not to get married off while Odysseus was gone. And and I love how ancient that is. I love how weaving is carried through every culture. And I also value bringing back the noticing of it because our threads, we are stronger together. One little thread is really not much, but you put us all together and then you look at that fabric and think we think about where our food comes, but I look about fabric differently now in how powerful it is as a
I
symbol.
love that image. I love that image because just having one string is not enough. And if you're one string to one other string, it's not enough. And looking at how you actually create that communal fabric in your life of strings, of many strings, and keeping them connected is so important and essential in these times. And for everybody listening, I hope you've enjoyed this symbol and these stories. And I encourage you to stay connected to Kathy in her work as she continues working on this book. And we're all going to look forward to reading it, Kathy, when it's ready.
Thank you. And thanks for asking and being interested. I'm so excited about it. And I really appreciate our conversation, especially
Well, I
as it
think
applies to the world.
we need thoughts like these for these times, and I feel like you've hit on something so significant that it's a gift to all of us to hear about it. And I I remember kind of where we were in the writing group when you read this piece and said this word. And I was like, oh my gosh, like light bulbs went off. And I'm so glad you're in pursuit of this and that you are exploring it and weaving it for all of us to get to read in the future. So thank
Thank
you
you.
so much.
Thank you.